I welcome you to News Once Was, a journey to the past to discover the forgotten lives of those eternally trapped in ink and shackled to the dusty pages of newspaper print. Friday, the 6th of March, 1812. The story of a deathbed confession from a London paper alleged to have been made by one Melling, a publican, formerly of Wigan and late of Liverpool, where he died last month, in which it was stated that he and his son, since dead, some years ago murdered 2 recruits and buried them in his garden, has been ascertained to be a wanton and malicious fabrication. Melling lived and died a man of good character. Friday, the 6th of March, 1812. Dreadful thunderstorm. In the storm last Tuesday at Plymouth, the Salvador del Mundo, the flagship, had 2 sailors wounded, one of them since dead. The Tennant, in Cawsand Bay, had her fore and mainmast so forcibly affected by the lightning that many parts of them were shivered into countless splinters. Several men on board were stunned by its powerful effect, and one in particular had a most narrow escape. Having taken shelter close to the mainmast, the lightning struck him and, knocking him down, partially burned his jacket and shirt off his back and side, at the same time leaving an impression on his bare skin resembling a branch of seaweed. Several other vessels experienced the attacks of the fiery elements, and among them the Helicon and Vigilante. In the latter ship, an officer and 9 men were temporarily stupefied, but no lives were lost on these ships. The Times. Friday, the 7th of February, 1812. A hint to lamp lighters. Last week, George Walter, contractor for lighting the lamps in Hull, was convicted before the mayor in the penalty of 10 guineas for not properly lighting 50 lamps on the Wednesday night of that week. The Rockingham paper. Friday, the 7th of February, 1812. Dreadful calamity. Richmond, Virginia, December 27th. Last night, the playhouse in this city was crowded. There could not have been less than 600 persons in the house. Just before the conclusion of the play, the scenery caught fire, and in a few minutes the whole building was wrapped in flames. The scenery took fire in the back part of the house by the raising of a chandelier. The boy, who was ordered by some of the players to raise it, stated if he did so the scenery would take fire. When he was commanded in a peremptory manner to hoist it, the boy obeyed, and the fire was instantly communicated to the scenery. He gave the alarm in the rear of the stage and requested some of the attendants to cut the cords by which the combustible materials were suspended. The person whose duty it was to perform the business became panic-struck and sought his own safety. This unfortunately happened at a time when one of the performers was playing near the orchestra, and the greatest part of the stage, with its horrid danger, was obscured from the audience by a curtain. The flames spread with almost the rapidity of lightning, and the fire falling from the scenery upon the performer was the first notice the people had of their danger. Even then, many supposed it to be part of the play, and, for a little time, restrained from flight by a cry from the stage that there was no danger. The performers and their attendants in vain attempted to tear down the scenery, The fire flashed into every part of the house with a rapidity horrible and astonishing. There was but one door for the greatest part of the audience to pass. Men, women, and children were pressing upon each other, while the flames were seizing those behind. Those nearest to the window, ignorant of their great danger, were afraid to leap down, while those behind them were seen on fire and writhing in the greatest agonies. All of those who were in the pit escaped, and had cleared themselves from the house before those who were in the boxes could get down, and the door was for some time empty. Those from above were pushing each other down the steps, when the hindermost might have got out by leaping into the pit. A gentleman and lady who otherwise would have perished had their lives saved by being providentially thrown from the second boxes. There would not have been the least difficulty in descending from the first boxes into the pit. In addition to the list now given, it is believed that at least 60 others perished, whose names are not yet ascertained. Friday, the 10th of January, 1812. On Thursday week, an inquest was held at Wexford on the body of W. Green, a young sweep who was burned by his father lighting a faggot in the chimney, which the boy had ran up to escape his tyranny. Verdict: that the deceased came to his death in consequence of being burned by his father, Luke Green. Friday, the 13th of March, 1812. The Stamford paper says, "We learn from Wisbeach that on Saturday night, 2 of the London wagons, on their return to that place, ran a race against each other, the consequence of which improper conduct was that one of them was overturned into a ditch, with 6 women and a boy. One woman had her collarbone broken, and another was very much hurt. They were all plunged over head and ears into the water. A lad who sometimes drives, but who was in the wagon at the time of the disaster, had a narrow escape with his life. He was pulled out for dead, but hopes are entertained of his recovery." Friday, 13th of March, 1812. 50 guineas reward. Whereas on Monday morning last, between the hours of 5 and 6 o'clock, an elderly gentleman hired a boat at the Parade Slip in Liverpool to go to the Cheshire shore, from whence he intended to proceed to Chester. And as neither the gentleman nor the boat has since been heard of, it is seriously apprehended by his friends that he must have been drowned. The above reward will be given to any person who can find the body, or 10 guineas reward, if any person can satisfactory proof of the landing of the said gentleman in Cheshire. The above gentleman was about 49 years of age, had on a full suit of black, brown greatcoat about 5 feet 9 inches high, quite lusty, short dark hair, partly grey, had with him as a small bundle tied up in a handkerchief. The boat had a lad 16 or 17 years of age, and no other person but the above gentleman in the boat. The above reward will be paid by Mr. John Cheeseborough, Liverpool, or Mr. A.L.K. Chester, by whom any information relative to the said gentleman or boat will be thankfully received. Friday, 13th of March, 1812. From a Canterbury paper. A man named Quick, residing at Herne, sold on Monday night his wife and 2 children to Tingley, another labourer, for a gallon of beer and 2 £1 notes. Friday, 14th of February, 1812. Wisbeach. Lately was exhibited for public inspection a bullock's kidney of the extraordinary weight 6 stone 5 pound, 14 pound to the stone. It measured 6 feet one way and 4 feet 4 inches the other. It was taken out of an ox bred by Mr. Bridges of Whittlesea and slaughtered by Mr. Bridges on St. Ives. What is still more remarkable, the weight of the ox was only 48 stones. From Drakard's News. Friday, 14th of February, 1812. A shocking accident happened at Brigg last week. A child, about a year old, pulled a vessel of boiling water off a table, by which it was so dreadfully scalded that it died the following day. Friday, 20th of March, 1812. Touch of the Marvellous. We copy the following from a provincial journal. A few mornings ago, after a windy night, as a gentleman was walking in London streets, he heard the cry of "Sweep, sweep" from out of the chimney pot. Whilst he was looking up, he saw it move, and immediately after, down came the pot and a boy. It fell on some rubbish below and broke in pieces like an egg. When out rolled the boy, who, after gathering himself up and viewing the height from which he had fallen, exclaimed, "My eye, here's a rig." Friday, 20th of March, 1812. A liver-coloured pointer, about a fortnight ago, followed a gentleman from the neighbourhood of Toxteth Park. The owner may have him again by applying to the printer and paying all reasonable expenses. Friday, the 20th of March, 1812. Execution at Horsemonger Lane. This morning, W. Cundall and John Smith were executed pursuant to their sentence for being found in arms in the Isle of France in the presence of some thousands of spectators. During this melancholy occasion, the sight was extremely distressing. At 8 o'clock, these two unfortunate young men were conducted from their cells to the chapel. After remaining some time there, they were drawn on a hurdle to the place of execution, and having, with becoming fortitude, ascended the scaffold, attended by the clergymen, they again spent a short time in prayer, seeming truly sensible of the fate which was fast approaching them. The dreadful moment at length arrived. They were launched off, and their bodies, after hanging half an hour, were taken down. While the executioner was performing that part of the remaining sentence, in severing off their heads, and alternately, with his right hand, presenting each to the surrounding spectators, exclaiming, "Behold, the head of a traitor." The scene became truly awful, and apparently dissolved in tears every individual who beheld the fate of the two young men, who thus, in the bloom of life, suffered death according to the laws of their country. Their remains were delivered over to their respective friends for interment. Friday, 20th of March, 1812. Longevity. Matthias, who wrote the history of the Indies, which has always been a model of veracity as well as elegant composition, mentions a native of Bengal named Numas Digudna, who died in 5066 at the age of 370. He was a man of great simplicity and quite illiterate, but of so extensive a memory that he was a kind of living chronicle, relating distinctly and correctly what had happened within his knowledge in the compass of his life, together with all the circumstances attending it. He had 4 new sets of teeth, and the colour of his hair and beard had been frequently changed from black to grey and from grey to black. He asserted that in the course of his life he had had 700 wives, some of whom died, the others he put away. The first century of his life passed in idolatry, from which he was converted to Mahometism, which he continued to profess to his death. This account is also confirmed by another Portuguese author, Ferdinand Lopes Castigaida, who was historiographer royal, from the American Statesman. Friday, the 20th of March, 1812. Palace of Ice. During the severe winter of 1740, there was a palace of ice, 52 feet and a half long, 16 and a half wide, and 20 high, built at Petersburg, according to the most elegant rules of art. The Neva, a neighbouring river, afforded the ice, which was from 2 to 3 feet thick, and blocks of which they cut out and embellished with various ornaments. When built up, they sprinkled them over the water of various tints. Before the palace they placed 6 cannon, all of which were made of and mounted with ice, with wheels of the same materials and 2 large bomb mortars. The caliber of the cannon was equal to that in which they put 3 pounds of powder. They only put a quarter of the pound in these, after which they made a hempen bullet, which in the presence of the whole court pierced a board of 2 inches thick at the distance of 60 paces. This renders credible what is reported by Aulus Magnus, a northern historian, concerning fortifications of ice, which he assures us certain nations made use of in cases of necessity. Friday, 20th of March, 1812. We have been informed of a singular instance of instinct in the common sparrow. A few weeks ago, a sparrow was remarked to fly several times with food in her mouth into a hole in an old wall. The curiosity of the person observing it was excited to ascertain the cause, and ascending to the place with a ladder, he found there a full-grown bird of the summer's brood, which had been accidentally entangled by one leg, in such a manner as not to be able to escape. Thus fettered, the old birds had not forsaken their unfortunate offspring, but had continued to feed and support it in its confinement, even for so many months after all the other individuals of the same brood had taken their flight. Friday, the 21st of February, 1812. An alligator was shot through the head at Gazipur by an officer of the 67th Regiment, which was 29 feet in length and 7 in circumference. In the stomach were found several half-digested human limbs, the heads of 2 children, and more than 20 stones, probably swallowed in order to assist digestion. From the London papers. Friday, 21st of February, 1812. A melancholy accident happened lately at Bergen in Norway. In consequence of the heavy rains, an enormous side was detached from the mountain and, falling upon some buildings, crushed 49 persons to death. Friday, the 21st of January, 1812. A few days ago, the passengers in a Yarmouth coach going from the metropolis were stopped at the toll gate near Colchester, and on inquiring the cause of the delay, were informed that they had travelled the last stage 9 miles through Clevedon without coachman or guard. Friday, the 21st of January, 1812. An Italian journal mentions that in July last, the skeleton of a man 10 feet 3 inches high was dug up in the valley of Mazzara in Sicily. Human skeletons of gigantic size have heretofore been found in the same spot. Friday, 24th of November, 1812. A curious and hazardous performance took place at Dover on the 24th for a trifling wager by a gentleman of the neighbourhood. There is a shaft excavated in Dover from the Snargate Street to the Heights, comprising 140 steps, nearly perpendicular and much resembling those in the Monument of London. The gentleman's servant first led his master's horse up the steps of the shaft, and to the astonishment of every person who followed him, he then led the animal to the bottom. After this, the gentleman mounted and arrived safe at the top of the shaft in nearly a trot, by which he won the wager. Friday, 24th of January, 1812. It is highly creditable to the courage of the female sex that the greatest opposition recently made to housebreakers has been proceeded from women. A tradesman in Fleet Street, disposed to profit by the existing terror about murderers, has advertised throat preservers, which, he assures the ladies, will be found no less ornamental than useful. These, it may be supposed, are an imitation of the collars of the shepherd's dogs in Spain, which are copper and iron spiked, to prevent the wolves from fastening on the neck of these faithful animals. Friday, 26th of March, 1812. Female high flyers. Madame Blanchard, notwithstanding her late disaster at Rome, made another ascension from that capital on the 25th of December. After experiencing the extremes of heat and cold, she says, she fell into a profound sleep, during which her balloon attained an elevation of 12,000 feet. She afterwards descended at Tagliacozza. Friday, the 31st of January, 1812. Mysterious circumstance. A few weeks ago, as Mr. Joseph Sanderson of Moss Side, Abbeyholme, was pulling down part of a wall in making some alterations in his house, to his utter astonishment he discovered, built up in the wall, the skeleton of a full-grown child, which must have remained there for 50 years at least. Friday, the 31st of January, 1812. A cormorant in the shape of a man near Sandbach, Cheshire, last week, for a small wager, ate, by measurement and not by weight, a pudding 16 inches long and 5 broad. He is a member of a sick club. Friday, the 31st of January, 1812. 1,000 miles in 1,000 hours. A person at Thrapston, near Undle, Northamptonshire, of the name of Ward, a wheelwright, has undertaken the arduous task of going 1,000 miles in 1,000 hours for the sum of 100 guineas, to be performed by the 1st of March. Friday, the 31st of January, 1812. The following advertisement is copied from the Plymouth paper. Wanted, a steady man in the seafaring line, not belonging to a man of war, for a husband for a widow woman. She hath a little property and 1 child. The man will be sure to meet with an agreeable partner and good employment in the merchant service. None but a decent middle-aged man need apply. Friday, the 3rd of January, 1812. Dreadful effects of anger. Thomas Maguire, a whitesmith in Enniskillen, a few days ago, in a passion, seized a red-hot bar of iron and plunged it into the body of James McGee, his apprentice, who languished until Monday night, when he died. March 1812. Slave trade. A letter has been received from a respectable gentleman just returned to the West Indies, by which we are grieved to hear that the slave ship was fallen in with on the passage which had left the coast of Africa with 100 slaves, 10 of whom had died. 3 of the whites had also died. The captain was ill, the whole appearance of the vessel was miserable, and she was in so leaky a state that it was thought she could hardly reach land. The captain, pretending to be a Spaniard, bound to Cuba, hoisted Spanish colours, but as he spoke English so well, there was every reason to believe he was an Englishman or an American, and was going to smuggle the slaves into some American port. When the mate went on board the slave ship, 2 of the poor negroes, supposing he was come to release them, lifted up their shackled hands and exclaimed, "Oh, King George, King George!" The ship, we regret to hear, was not captured, but suffered to proceed with her miserable and unlawful cargo, either to perish in the waves or to be sold in the market like beasts. March 1812. When Brennan, the noted highwayman, was taken in the south of Ireland some months ago, curiosity drew numbers to the jail to see the man loaded with irons who had long been a terror to the country. Among others was a banker, who at the time was not held in the highest estimation. When he assured the prisoner that he was very glad to see him there, Brennan, looking up, replied, "Ah, sir, I did not expect that from you. Indeed I did not, for you well know that when all the country refused your notes, I took them." April 1812. Modern times. A female servant, in offering herself for hire to a lady in the city of Canterbury, after the usual inquiries, said there was one thing she had forgot to mention, which was, that she might be permitted to go out 2 evenings in the week to practice dancing. April 3, 1812. At the assizes at Bury St. Edmunds, John Smith and Eliza, his wife, were tried for cruelly beating, starving, and torturing Anne Smith, his daughter, to whom the latter was stepmother. The history of cruelty since the days of Mother Brownrigg cannot parallel what appeared on this trial. The child was so abused by torture and starvation that her feet mortified and nearly dropped off. 2 other children were with difficulty recovered. These 2 monsters were executed at Ipswich on Monday week. April 3, 1812. A grand national library, the collection of which was begun by Catherine II, has been completed and opened at Petersburg. It comprises 250,000 printed volumes, 80,000 of which relate to theology, and 40,000 duplicates. There are 12,000 manuscripts, many of them exceedingly scarce. April 3, 1812. A female court of justice. The trial of one Sandals at the Sussex Assizes for an assault upon Mary Gaston, the particulars of which we do not think proper to give at length. It appeared that the brutal wretch was not taken into custody for some weeks afterwards. But the women of the place one day caught him and put him into a tub and pumped upon him. They next tossed him in a blanket, and after they were tired of that amusement, they threw him into a horse pond. They next rolled him in the mud and scrubbed him down with birch brooms. At length, the parson and churchwardens, hearing of the case, insisted upon a legal inquiry, and after a length of time he was apprehended. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment. April 3, 1812. If an argument were wanting in favour of the institution of national schools, it would adduce the following fact. At the late Norfolk Assizes, out of 10 prisoners tried, only 3 could read and 1 write. April 10, 1812. British intrepidity rewarded. An account has recently been received from South America stating that the Queen of Portugal's life had been preserved by the prompt assistance rendered to Her Majesty by an English sailor named Matthews. The Queen was in the act of taking a drive in her carriage drawn by 4 mules, which, after throwing their riders, ran furiously away and were proceeding at full speed to the verge of a precipice. All her attendants and spectators were so much alarmed that they did not attempt to arrest their progress, which was courageously performed by the sailor before mentioned, on whom the Prince Regent of Portugal has settled a pension for life, and requested, through his captain, that he might be discharged from the Navy, which the Admiralty have directed to be carried into effect. April 17, 1812. Destroying caterpillars. A gardener at Glasgow practices a mode of destroying caterpillars, which he discovered by accident. A piece of woolen rag had been blown by the wind into a currant bush, and when taken out was found covered by the leaf-devouring insects. He immediately placed pieces of woolen cloth on every bush in the garden, and found next day that the caterpillars had universally taken to them for shelter. In this way he destroys many thousands every morning. 17th of April, 1812. There is a man of the name of Richard Scott, now living in Maryport, who has been employed by the Curwens of Workington Hall for 55 years, and in that time he has never lost a day's wages. For the last 27 years, he has walked 29,170 miles to and from his work, at which he still continues, though 80 years of age. "17th of April, 1812. An eagle of an extraordinary size and fierceness was lately killed at Moyev, department of the Moselle. It attacked a man who had alighted from his horse to pick up something from the ground, and notwithstanding he repeatedly struck it and called out for assistance, would not relinquish his hold until some peasants ran up and dispatched it. "17th of April, 1812. A Mrs. Bumby died lately at Eakring in her 80th year. In earlier life, she acted as a schoolmistress till the age of 50, when she married, and on the day of her marriage a mental derangement took place, from which she never wholly recovered. What is remarkable, a horn sprung within the last few years from one side of her forehead, and grew in a crooked form to the length of nearly 6 inches. Another also made its appearance, but its growth was stopped." From the Times. "17th of April, 1812. Singular circumstance. A hive of bees belonging to a Mr. Wools of Bourne swarmed about 10 days ago. The swarm settled on a stack belonging to Mr. E. Smith, and then rose, took wing, and was never seen again." "24th of April, 1812. A cow, the property of John Stewart, in Whitefield, Blairgowrie, in April 1811, calved 3 calves, 2 bulls and a cow, a dun, a black, and a yellow, all doing well. And in April 1812, the said cow calved 3 calves, 2 bulls and a cow, 2 yellow and a black, 2 of which are living and doing well. The said cow is only 7 years old." Greenock Advertiser, April 17th. On the 21st, Joseph Exile was executed at Aylesbury, pursuant to his sentence at the last assizes for horse stealing, and shocking to relate, his own father stood with the utmost composure and witnessed the awful scene. It appears that this old villain has been the cause of several of his sons being brought to an untimely end. He was lately acquitted at Aylesbury, having been tried several times before for a charge of horse stealing, for which 2 more of his sons are now under sentence of death. The populace was so incensed at the unfeeling wretch that they handled him very roughly, and had it not been for the interference of the constables, in all probability his life would have been in danger. From the Sheffield Irish. "24th of April, 1812. Distressing event. On the 15th, 2 fine young men, the sons of Daniel Keane of North Meols, in this county, were drowned in consequence of the sudden upsetting of their fishing boat. It was supposed by a whirlwind. This afflictive stroke will be most severely felt by their poor parents, as the industrious youths were of great service in assisting them to bring up the younger branches of their family." 24th of April, 1812. Lately, of a cancer in her breast, in Market Drayton, Elizabeth Beach, a poor woman, at the great age of 103 years and odd months, having been born in the year 1708, which was the 6th of the reign of Queen Anne, she alleged that she fully remembered the coronation of King George I, which happened when she was about 6 years of age. She disliked broth, tea, and all kinds of slops, and partook of the coarsest food, such as potatoes and bacon, on which she fed heartily. Of late, she abstained from cheese, which she found hard to digest. She possessed her memory and eyesight till within the last year or two, almost unimpaired. "24th of April, 1812. Died on the 29th at Kimbolton, the Reverend Mr. Codling, the resident curate, while preaching from the 118th Psalm, verses 17, 18, 19, I shall not die but live, and declare the works of the Lord. The Lord hath chastened me sore, but he hath not given me over unto death. Open to me to the gates of righteousness. I will go into them, and I will praise the Lord." He suddenly stopped short and exclaimed, I can't, and immediately sunk down in the pulpit and almost instantly expired. He was only 32 years of age. "24th of April, 1812. Smallpox. 160 persons died of the smallpox during the year 1811 in the city of New York, and yet, strange to say, vaccination is performed gratis at the dispensary in that place. "24th of April, 1812. At Gloucester Assizes, John Evans for horse stealing and Dan Bishop for a like offence were condemned. The last named prisoner pretended idiocy during trial, but on condemnation being passed, made use of the most horrible expressions to the judge, and said, I wish I was near thee, that I might give thee a bolter, and on quitting the court whirled his hat at one of the witnesses. Maximine Bonneville, a chimney sweeper, who was found guilty of the murder of his apprentice by brutal usage, was sentenced to be executed. "24th of April, 1812. On Tuesday week, a poor boy was murdered in a wood near Woolwich by a ruffian, who, having robbed his master and being pursued, fled for refuge to the wood, where, being seen by the boy, the latter screamed with terror of him, on which the villain seized and strangled him. He was apprehended soon after, when he confessed that he was nearly 3 hours in perpetrating this horrid deed." From the London papers. "24th of April, 1812. A curious incident lately took place at Greenside Street, Edinburgh, which occasioned considerable amusement. A large dog of the terrier kind, which had followed his master from the middle of Leith Walk to a house 4 stories high, number 9 Greenside Street, where he had to call, being kept outside of the door and prevented from following him into the house, watched the moment when the door was accidentally opened and ran into the room where he was with the gentleman of the house. But on receiving a hint from his master, who shook his fist at him, that he was an unwelcome intruder, he immediately ran towards the door, which, finding shut, he proceeded to a room where a lady was looking out of a window, and at one spring to her unutterable astonishment, leaped over her head into the street, took a lamp-post in his way, and shivered the lamp to pieces. He was only a little stunned by the fall, and, besides fighting as stout a battle as he ever did by the road, arrived safely at home before his master. April 24th, 1812. Superstition. A farmer in the neighbourhood of Biggar, near Glasgow, had some calves which died lately, and as he had suffered repeatedly, he was convinced that his cowhouse was bewitched. He resorted to a remedy held by traditious superstition to be effectual in such cases, that of burying alive one of the best of his calves. May 1st, 1812. 5 persons, including a woman and a boy, were on Saturday week lodged in Castlebar Jail, charged with the crime of cutting out the tongues of several lambs. May 1st, 1812. At the Devon Sessions, a woman was sentenced to be imprisoned for 12 months for having, as a fortune-teller, extorted from a credulous girl at Sidmouth the sum of £3 5s, for telling her that on a certain day 2,000 guineas would jump up through the floor, accompanied with £1,000 worth of silver. May 8th, 1812. The soldier who failed in his duty when the populace attacked Mr. Cartwright's at Rawfolds has been tried by a court-martial and sentenced to receive 300 lashes. On Monday, he was marched to Rawfolds to receive his sentence, but, owing to Mr. C's humane interference, the punishment was mitigated to 25 lashes. May 15th, 1812. A most extraordinary accident happened at the late Chester races. Whilst Sir T. Stanley's colt was running for the member's purse on Tuesday, he suddenly became restive, and on examination after the heat, it was discovered he had become quite blind, supposed to be owing to the excessive exertions. Please feel free to like and subscribe.